Hello and welcome back to Ambitious. I am very excited to have you here today because if you have pressed play on today's episode, you are somebody who most likely either perceives that you may be struggling with perfectionism or you may know for a fact that this is something that you struggle with. And I want to let you know, first and foremost, you're not alone. I am also somebody at times who has struggled a lot with perfectionism. And I will say, helping myself to process through where perfectionism comes from, what are the different ways that that shows up in our businesses and in our life, what is the impact of that, how do we rewire that, and my own learning around all of those things was actually something that really greatly impacted me being able to scale my business as fast as I did, because I realized that my perfectionism was actually the thing that was pushing off my success. It was making my progress stagnant. It was pushing me away from taking action in the speed that I could. And so I want to first acknowledge you for being here and thank you so much for listening. And if you are someone new who's listening to Ambitious for the first time, welcome to the Ambitious family. I'm excited to have you here. And also for you OGs, and you know who you are, who listen to this every single week, I want to say thank you, because this podcast would not be what it is without you and all of the insights and awarenesses and feedback and all the things that you bring along the way. So thank you. To start off, really want to get an understanding for all of us as a baseline when we use this word of perfectionism. What does that actually mean? So if we are somebody who is struggling with perfectionism, whether in our life or in our business, what is that? So I'm going to literally define this for you. And this is not just my personal definition. This is literally the definition for perfectionism and what this is. So perfectionism is the tendency to set excessively high standards for yourself and to strive for flawlessness, often that is accompanied by a critical self-evaluation, which I'm also like, okay, now I'm triggered. Now I see myself already, okay? It involves fear of making mistakes, a desire for control, and a strong emphasis on achieving perfect results in every aspect of your life. This can be work, appearance, relationships, all different buckets. Most importantly, perfectionism can lead to self-stress, criticism, and dissatisfaction, especially when we have standards and those things are not met. So I want to first define this because we're going to use the word perfectionism quite a lot in today's episode. And so I want to kind of get an understanding of, okay, what is that? It is this strive for, frankly, something that doesn't exist. Because the other thing that was a big awareness for me in understanding and in learning about perfectionism was also recognizing that perfectionism also assumes that there is a defined perfect. And what I know from myself and also from all the businesses that I've helped and that I've worked with is that it's kind of like that classic quote, right? Of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The same thing is true when it comes to perfect. You know, how do we know that something really is perfectly done? How do we know that it's perfectly complete? How is there any way for us to actually know that? And all of it is based off of our own internal standards, which for many of us are very, very high. So if you struggle with perfectionism, the thing that I know from firsthand experience, as well as from all the businesses that I help, is that this is going to show up in your world in a variety of ways. And so if you're maybe like, do I struggle with perfectionism? Maybe I just have high standards for the work that I do, or maybe I just really care about my work. These are all things that we say. How do we know if we're actually someone who's struggling with perfectionism in our life and in our business? And so I'm going to give you some signs that maybe are going to help you to better understand, you know, maybe this is something that's very relevant in your life and something you want to dive more into. So one of the things that I see with a lot of business owners is when they struggle with perfectionism, they are someone who really obsesses about over planning. Like they are somebody who is all about refining the details, planning, conceptualizing, you know, thinking about all the things that could go wrong, making a plan for those. If you are somebody who's constantly in planning mode and you're trying to plan out all the mistakes and plan out every single detail, it really usually leads people, because they're planning so much, to actually not necessarily take action. So it could be something like, you know, truthfully, if I'm being transparent, this podcast. When I first had the idea for this podcast, I was in planning mode. I was like, what's the curtain I want to have behind me? What's the chair that I want to sit in? What's the microphone that I want to use? What's the cover art? And I started to go down this list of like 52 different things that I needed to have sorted out before I could quote unquote launch. And, you know, you've heard me talk about this in other episodes. One of my biggest regrets was actually not starting this podcast earlier, because I recognize that my procrastination on launching this podcast was really not about anything other than the fact that I was really fearing that if I pressed go on it and launched it and released it to the world, it wasn't going to be perfect. And it wasn't going to be something that I would be comfortable to stand behind. And so because of that, what it led me to do is to not do it, right? It led me to push it away and away. And like I literally had this idea for like 2 years, but I told myself I need to plan. What are the guests? How do I want to interview? What's the intro? And frankly, hid in the details, because that was a way for me to have it be perfect by having to flesh out all these pieces before I press go. So one of the signs that will happen is that you're over planning. You're constantly conceptualizing, and oftentimes it means that you're pushing off deadlines, pushing off due dates. That offer you had the idea of, it's not quite done yet, so I'm going to wait another month to launch it. You're pushing away the deadlines and due dates because you feel like you need to plan a little bit more, and ultimately it leads you to avoiding action. Second is the fear of failure. You are someone who really does not like the idea of risk. Like you're somebody who doesn't necessarily like the idea of, your action that you're taking not working, or that it's not going to help you to grow if it's not done. Like you don't want to risk releasing something to the world, or you don't want to risk taking an action that you don't feel like you have almost like 98% probability that you're going to crush at. And really what that comes down to when we're like, oh no, like I have to do this before I press go, what that is a fear of failure. It's this fear of, if I release this to the world, or if I take this action and it's not perfect, or if I don't make this resource or this marketing or this offer or whatever it might be completely perfect, and I release it, it may not do well. And it not doing well really means that you would have to navigate it not hitting the outcome that you desired, which will bring up this fear of failure. So fear of failure can be a really big sign of like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? I have to fix it. I have to work on it a little bit more. Those are signs that you are not comfortable or okay with the task that you're working on, or the thing that you're putting energy into, not doing well. And that really comes down to fear of failure. Also, micromanaging, feeling the need to control everything. I see this a lot with people who have teams. You will see people who have teams who literally have 3, sometimes 5 people on their team. But because they struggle so much with perfectionism, they micromanage the crap out of every single person, every process, every project, because they believe that by them being involved, they can again protect the outcome. And they can be the reason that it will not fail and everything will look exactly how it's supposed to be. And it leads to a lot of micromanagement. It leads to basically having yourself involved at every piece of the puzzle, because without that, you fear what's going to happen. It's not going to be quote unquote perfect. Or when someone does get delegated the work, so you might again have hired somebody for not even on your team, but just like to a project. Say you hire someone to do your website, or you hire someone to do designs for you. Revisions. This is a really good indicator to know the level of relationship that you have when it comes to perfectionism. Because if you are delegating a project to somebody and you're asking for 8, 9, 10, 12 revisions, or even like, let's just say a design for Instagram, you get it back from a designer and you say, I want it revised 4 times. After the second time, we're getting into perfect territory, because it means that we're looking to nitpick so much and edit so much that we just can't fathom this going out without another revision, another revision. There's always something to change, which is why there's always so many revisions. So when you constantly are revising work, it's because you don't feel like anything is ever good enough. It's this belief that it's always going to lead to a place where there could be something else to be done. And because of those revisions, as I said earlier, with delaying timelines, this is ultimately going to lead to a massive inefficiency in your business. Because the post, let's just say for a design, as we said, that should have taken 2 revisions is now taking 4. And that means if it had been 2, we could have created 2 different posts in the same amount of time that you took to make one perfectly. And this actually came up recently in my business because I had someone who made a montage for me of one of our retreats that we did. And they sent it to me and I was like, I don't like this and I don't like that. And I started to nitpick it. We got to the 3rd version. And I remember like a peer of mine who has a very large business said, Kate, I'm just going to be really direct with you. It literally doesn't matter. The things that you're so focused on and that you're nitpicking about the text or the editing or the transition or like the song triumph hitting this point and then the clip hitting that point, it literally doesn't matter. It does not matter. Release it to the world. You can revise it later. The retreat you're talking about is not for months to come. It literally doesn't matter. And it was such like for me, a necessary like hit over the head with reality, because I realized that I was revising and revising and revising, because to me, there was still more that could always be done. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. It needed to be more, more, more. And frankly, I didn't even have a destination of what quote unquote complete was going to be, which is why there was always more revisions to happen. So asking yourself, are there constant revisions to work? Like, do you feel like nothing that anyone ever brings to you ever can be done in a reasonable amount of revisions? There's always so much to be done. And it's an opportunity for us to look into the mirror and say, okay, well, are you really seeing that it's genuinely not good work? Or are you nitpicking each little individual detail? Because frankly, transparently, nothing is going to be good enough, right? Also, with this, because of the revisions and because of wanting to micromanage, you probably also feel like you can't delegate. Like anything you want to hire someone for, you're like, oh, I'll just do it myself. The amount of times that I hear I will just do it myself and people not wanting to delegate because other people just like quote unquote don't get it. I tell clients very directly, your business is only as scalable as what you can teach others to do. So if you, with your perfectionist perspective, and you see all these amazing things that you can't teach anyone else to see, and you just have the quote unquote eye for it or the brain for it, if that's something that is keeping you from being able to delegate in your business, really you're capping your own success, you're capping your own scaling. Because the ability to delegate in your business is, whether in-house and having your own team or outsourcing to an agency or a contractor or someone outside of your current structure, it doesn't matter. Your ability to delegate something to another person is really going to determine how fast and how easy you scale. And if you are so focused on no one can do it like me, no one sees what I see, no one thinks the way I think, and that is a narrative that you have, that's rooted in perfectionism. It's rooted in this belief that there is only this specific vision and set of things that you can see and no one else can. So as a result, you cannot delegate. And I always catch people on this wording of like, I can't give this away, and those absolutes types of language. Because when we have that absolute type of language, what's happening is we're already deciding in our brain that we can't give this away. There's no possibility that someone else could. And so when someone says I can't, I'm like, okay, well, instead, can we ask the question, how could I delegate this? How could I teach someone else to know how to look for what I'm looking for? So when you can't delegate, this is a really good opportunity to say, is it that you can't delegate, or could you delegate, but you refuse to because you don't feel in your mindset or perspective of perfectionism that anyone can do what you do because it's so unique and individualized to you? Because you can't delegate, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to experience, because of perfectionism, tons of chronic stress and tons of burnout, because you are constantly pushing for more, this kind of like moving target all the time of it could be better, it could be more refined, it could be better quality, it could hit more, whatever the thing is that you're looking at. And because of that, you always feel like if you just push yourself a little bit more, it will hit that target. But what we don't often recognize is that's a moving target, right? Like it hitting this mark that you're looking for it to hit is constantly moving. So what that leads to is constantly putting in more hours, constantly putting in more work, and constantly feeling like it's never finished. And what do we know about work that feels like it's never finished, and yet we continue to dive in? Guess what? Hello, burnout. Hello, no self-care. Hello, the hours have doubled in the business, right? And so when we look at those who struggle with perfectionism, we look at burnout and stress being one of the key indicators that there's something here that is obviously amiss. And as I said, I'm not teaching this from like, I'm up here and you're down here. I am saying a lot of this from a place of like experience and a place of being so stressed and burnt out. Like I remember vividly, I was editing like a Canva document or something. And I remember going into this Canva doc and like editing the design that someone had done for me. And at this point, I was a 7-figure business owner. So I remember it was like 8 o'clock at night. I justified it to myself. I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit in my office on one of my monitors. I'm going to put on YouTube and like put on some, show or something in the background or a video. And then on the other side, I'm going to edit this document. Guys, I was a 7-figure business owner and I'm sitting in Canva editing this thing because it just doesn't look the way that I want it to look. That document, in the amount of hours I put in and what it generated for us, was definitely ROI negative, i.e. putting in 5 hours into editing this Canva doc really did not make a single blip of change within our business. And yet I was 5 hours less of self-care, 5 hours less of pouring into my own cup, and frankly, 5 hours less of efficiency because I had just put time in believing like this is what I needed to do because in my mind, it had to be perfect. So it really ultimately leads to as well another core sign being overthinking decisions and getting stuck in constant paralysis of navigating what about this and what about this. And this is a big one I see with a lot of my clients who come to me and we start coaching together because they'll come and they'll have an idea for, let's just say, an offer, or they want to launch something. And they're like, well, what about this? And what about that? And also like, quick question, what about this? And like, what should I price it at? And like, at this point, like, what should the messaging be? And like, do you think that people will hit with this messaging or that messaging? Or do you think that maybe I should put this on the sales page like above or below? And I'm like, hey, first of all, take a breath. Take a breath, because the questions you're asking are not strategic questions. They're frankly safety questions, which means you don't feel safe to make a move in your business because you fear every choice that you're making. You fear the choice of the branding. You fear the choice of the offer. You fear the choice of the price point. You fear the choice of the messaging. And people who struggle with perfectionism are often people who nitpick and ask questions about every little tiny piece because they're so focused on all those little pieces that they can't see the big picture. So they believe that by asking all these questions and having like analysis paralysis and thinking of every alternative situation, that that's going to be the thing that allows whatever they're working on to be perfect and therefore to be successful. But what it really is that you're overthinking, and you end up in this cycle loop of just overthinking things that 9 times out of 10, I can tell you as a business owner and as a coach, are not going to even make a difference in the success of what you're doing. So as part of this, something that also you'll see, and as another sign, is that even in these conversations, people struggle with feedback. They struggle with criticism. They struggle with, if I put this out, well, what if I launch and it doesn't do well? Or what if I put this podcast out and people don't think that it's good quality? Or what if I do X and this happens? And they struggle with having the potential to do something and it not doing well. Like they can't fathom what that would look like. It feels like something that is so scary and so overwhelming to them that they try again to go back into analysis paralysis or going into nitpicking because they can't imagine not being praised. They can't imagine whatever their vision is not hitting certain expectations. And so oftentimes, because of that, this also leads to imposter syndrome, because there's this belief that you feel like a fraud or you feel like you're undeserving of success, even when you achieve goals, because there's still more to be done. It could have been better. It could have sold faster. It could have hit and, gone more viral. It could have achieved more. I could have signed more clients. There's always this unfinished nature. And because of that, there's very rarely a lack of acknowledgement of what you've achieved. So even when you've achieved really big goals and you've achieved things that you've set out to do, you give it 5 seconds and before you know it, you're like, okay, great. Well, but I didn't do blank. The amount of entrepreneurs that I talk to who hit goals and hit achievements, let's just say again, like, surface level thing, but like they hit $100,000 month. And they're like, yeah, but like, I really was going for 120. You just hit your first $100,000 month and you're going to come back to me with feedback to say, yeah, but it wasn't 120. Like it's really this perspective and mindset of perfect, and this perspective and mindset of it's never finished is such a loop that we will recycle over and over if we're not careful, because it means that you're never finished. And because you're never finished, you're never going to create momentum in your business, because you won't acknowledge a milestone. You won't acknowledge achievement in any fashion. It's only perfect or I didn't hit it at all. I'm never happy with it unless it's perfect. And as we talked about earlier, that perfect milestone is forever changing and moving. And listen, as I said, I'm not preaching to you off my high horse over here, okay? Like, I am somebody who myself has struggled with perfectionism. I've struggled with this, and it's something I'm aware of that I'm constantly trying to work through and address in my own business. And I want to just normalize this, because 50% of entrepreneurs are known to exhibit perfectionist tendencies compared to the 30-40% that the average population has. So if you're not an entrepreneur and you're somebody who maybe works in corporate or you don't have your own business, most of society has about 30 to 40% of them that feel and experience perfectionism on a daily basis. Whereas with entrepreneurs, it's, say, compared to 30, 20% higher in entrepreneurs, because I feel like what this means to me and what I decipher from this, entrepreneurs are very attached to their business, right? You often probably tell yourself things like, yeah, but this is my baby. Like, this is my thing. This is like my bread and butter. This is the thing that I created. And because this is your baby, and because it's something you've poured so much into, you want to see it succeed. You care a lot about it. But it's really taking that care and saying, is us caring about our business really shifting into controlling it so much out of this belief that it's rooted in care? So another stat showed entrepreneurs are 50% more likely to experience mental health issues as a result of perfectionism compared to non-entrepreneurs. 50%, 50% more likely to experience mental health issues connected to perfectionism than non-entrepreneurs. Okay. And 30 to 40% of entrepreneurs have reported perfectionism being the leading source of their burnout and stress. Okay. 30-40% of entrepreneurs have indicated that perfectionism was the source that led to their burnout and their stress. And this is the one that I found very interesting. Female entrepreneurs are 1.5 times more likely to struggle with perfectionism than men. Female entrepreneurs are 1.5 times more likely to struggle with perfectionism than male entrepreneurs. So this is why, you guys obviously know that I nerd out on a lot of the topics we talk about on Ambitious. And this is why, is because when I saw these stats of like 50% more likely to experience this than others, we're seeing, 1.5 times more likely to experience perfectionism in women versus men. Like, this is something that we as female entrepreneurs are struggling with. This is something that many of us are navigating. You are not alone if you feel like you're constantly struggling with perfectionism. So then I asked myself the question, okay, well, obviously we now know what perfectionism is. We know how this shows up in our businesses, and we know it's very relevant. It's very, very prevalent amongst us as well as our peers. So the question becomes, where does it come from? Like, why do we have this? Why do we feel such perfectionism? Why do we struggle with this? And there's a couple different areas that this comes from and how this is rooted in us, or where this exists from. One of the first and foremost in me doing a lot of research on perfectionism came from the fact that this came from early childhood of when we were younger, as well as our parenting. Because if you grew up in a household where you had very high expectations of you and you were often criticized by your parents, you ultimately as a child internalized those standards, and it often will lead you to believing that you need to be flawless or you need to achieve something specific in order to receive approval or love from your family or from your parents. And as I say this, I want to say that, I talked about this with one of my friends who's an entrepreneur, a female entrepreneur, and she was saying how she grew up in an Arabic household, and in their household, there was a massive, massive emphasis on achievement. And like, it wasn't just about getting a job, it was about getting a specific job. And it wasn't about, going to a school, it was about going to a specific school. And it wasn't about getting good grades, it was about getting a specific grade. And it wasn't about, taking care of your appearance, it was about having a very specific appearance. And, as I'm saying this, you might be thinking back on your childhood and thinking about your mom or your dad and, the way that they may have brought you up with certain beliefs or certain things that you were told were the quote unquote right way. And as I say this, I want to say that this is not to say that our parents did so out of ill intent. I think every parent is parenting for the first time. And so because of that, they oftentimes are just doing their best to try to coach or try to lead their kids, i.e. you or me, to do so from a place of just helping them to achieve like their best life. Oftentimes is where the intention comes from. Not always, but oftentimes it's where the intention or their heart comes from. And I think what often we don't recognize is that sometimes maybe our perfectionism is not actually ours. Maybe the reason that you're wanting things to look a certain polished way is not because you care about it looking a polished way, but more because when you would go to see friends or family, or you would go to events as a child, your parents would ask you to put on a specific dress or do your hair a certain way. Your aspect of wanting to look a certain way before you show up may have nothing to do with just you or lack of confidence or any of those things. And it may have everything to do with what your parents told you was the quote unquote right way. And even money, right? Like there's an aspect too with being an entrepreneur of financial success. And I just had a conversation with someone the other day and they were saying, I realized that my pushing for more numbers and more money wasn't necessarily even me and me wanting to hit this very specific perfect number, but it actually was rooted in the fact that my dad told me that I wasn't successful until I hit a certain number. So them pushing in their business and working more and working harder or longer hours was not because they wanted to. It was because they genuinely believed to their core as their truth that if they did not hit a very specific number in their business, there was more work to be done. We weren't finished here and we had to keep going. So our childhood shapes so much of our belief systems, our values, the way we make decisions, what we believe to be true. And so when you're struggling with perfectionism in your business, instead of beating yourself up and saying, well, this is something that I'm navigating, could we instead look to get curious? Could we get curious about where did this come from? What did my dad tell me was the right thing? What did my mom bring me up with as beliefs? What was considered quote unquote normal or desired as specific outcomes or achievement in our household? How were we brought up to believe we were to be successful? What did we believe to be true when it comes to success or achievement? Those are questions you can ask yourself to dive deeper into, like, where does this perfectionism I'm experiencing even come from? And I think this also, another big impact of this is the social or the cultural influence of perfectionism, right? And, an example that everyone will understand is even when we think about, on TikTok, right? They had these like aesthetic girl vlogs. And the aesthetic girl vlogs, while, is just a very easy example, is really a case study of this societal or social or cultural impact. Because the aesthetic girl lifestyle basically created this perception of what a perfect life looks like, or a perfect day looks like, or clean girl aesthetic, having the perfect, look of a certain way that you look or present and what that looks like. And so what this does is it basically through social media has put this emphasis on perfectionism in either our life, our home, our business, even our appearance. Like I'll be, really honest. I think even with the rise of plastic surgery, the rise of filler and things like that, again, and I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. Like I've had filler. So I'm not someone who's saying that this is a good or a bad thing. There's no right or wrong in any of it. But I think it's just having the awareness. It's understanding that if you are deciding that you want to look a certain way, or you want to have a certain life, or you want to, and again, business example, create a certain piece of content and it has to look aesthetic, says who? Where does that come from? And if you should decide that you want it to look a certain way, that's fine. But we should also acknowledge that, is that yours? Is that your desire? I.e., back to, our, say, plastic surgery or filler example, maybe you at your core genuinely have a part of you that you would want to change. And it has nothing to do with anything you've seen on social media. It's something you felt in your heart since you were young. I have a friend of mine who, when she was younger, I'm not exactly sure the term for it is, but her ears were popped out to the side when she was younger and were more pronounced. And I remember she was saying it was something that was an insecurity of hers. And so when she was younger, she had them pinned as part of a surgery. But like, that was because it completely changed how she felt. She's talked about it. It changed how she felt about herself. It changed how she presented. It changed how she was able to go through her day. It was for her. It wasn't for anybody else. But there's an acknowledgement we have to have in our business and in being, especially for those who are personal brands, to say, am I showing up in such a way because I believe that social media has told me this is how I'm supposed to show up? Or am I doing so out of a place because that's how I desire to show up? That's how I desire to present. It's not because social media has told me it's perfect. It's because I really feel, for me, that this is what feels best. So I think it's acknowledging that a lot of the programming we get could be from our upbringing, but also from society and culture telling us what perfect is day in, day out. And social media is a massive culprit for that. And also this aspect of, to be honest, as we talked about, fear of failure, right? Like, we may have this perception of fear of failure. And so because of that, we see making a mistake as catastrophic. So when we have that belief about making a mistake, what happens? We end up avoiding that at all costs. We feel like we don't want to take a risk. We don't want to take big moves because it could not work out. And what that does is it ultimately stunts our growth. And another big, indicator, in my opinion, of like where this comes from is it could be from your upbringing. It could be from society and culture. It could be from this fear of failure, as we talked about, but also from, frankly, if I'm going to be candid about it, low self-worth and low self-esteem. And I will speak from myself. I feel like even for me, when I was creating our brand to be very luxe and very refined, I don't know that it was as much from this belief of like, I actually desire to be a luxury brand, because I wouldn't say that my day to day is very luxe, but I don't know that I created it from, the fact that my actual life was luxurious, as much as I think there was a lot of it that had to do with me having a very low self-worth. I had to do a lot of work in the last year, if I'm going to be honest, because I kind of lost myself in business a little bit because I got wrapped up in what it was supposed to look like, and thinking that I couldn't show up a certain way on social media because I wouldn't be deemed to be professional, or people wouldn't respect me, or, that people wouldn't want to invest with me if I was showing up a certain way. And really what it came down to was that I believed that my value to other people came from the way that I was showing up. It came from the way that I presented myself. And that was something that I had to unpack, because I was like, I can't sustainably do this business. I can't sustainably build this and show up each day unless I rewrite this narrative that I have inside of me. And so another one that I see with low self-worth or low self-esteem, and a big, big, big one for businesses, is financial milestones. The amount of business owners that, truthfully, I just have so much compassion for, and I just empathize, because when I watch their marketing and their entire identity is how much money they make, there's multiple lenses we can take from this. It could be from the marketing lens or, whatever. But at the end of the day, what I feel about that is it shows to me a lack of self-worth. Because the thing that I acknowledge when someone feels like they have to constantly talk, and I'm not saying that it's bad. You can share how much money you make. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes the all day, everyday basis of what you market, or the basis of how you show up, or the basis of how you deem your value, i.e., like, if every conversation we're having as business owners comes back to how much money you're making, all that tells me at that table is that your self-worth is entirely directly connected to how much money you make. And that tells me that you don't have any self-worth, that you have no self-esteem. Because the business owners that I know that are wildly successful don't tell people every other conversation about how much money they're making. Oftentimes, you'll be sitting beside them. And this actually happened at an event. I went to a marketing event and I was sitting beside one of the heads of the marketing department of Pfizer, like the vaccine. And we were just sitting at a restaurant having dinner. And never once was there a discussion about their total sales or about their total, revenue they generated or the sales from this product or this launch or this push. No one at that table was talking about their financial revenue milestones. And some of my peers who literally have 8-figure businesses are not people that talk about the fact, oh, I have an 8-figure business in every conversation. And so what we want to recognize is that when we're constantly striving for perfect and we're constantly looking to do more, achieve more, or attain more, it can often be because we don't see value in ourselves unless we do it. Do you not see value in yourself unless you look a certain way or show up a certain way? Do you not see value in you or your brand unless it's polished or curated? Do you not see value in you as a business owner unless you're making a certain amount of money? That comes down to having low self-worth and low self-esteem. And so there's also this aspect of past experiences, which is also traumatic or stressful experiences like a trauma, like a rejection that can lead to us using perfectionism as a coping mechanism to frankly survive. Right. So, I've even seen there was a situation with a peer they were telling me about, and they had gone to a speaking engagement. And the speaking engagement, they went in kind of with this belief or this perception of like messy action and not wanting to make it again perfect. And they were okay with that. And so fast forward, they go into doing the speaking engagement and it did not go well, as in like the messy action of it ended up just being messy. And so now, because there was issues with tech and there was issues with presentation, and then they got bad feedback, like we mentioned earlier, they got bad feedback about what it looked like. And also, people not resonating with it. It now has them sick to their stomach in preparation and thinking about all the worst case scenarios. And what about if this happens? Or what if, the audience doesn't like it and I need more information about this, and constant planning and preparation. That now it's gone to the total other side of the spectrum. It's gone from, messy action and not overemphasizing every detail being fleshed out to I am going to flesh out every single detail for 6 months on end before a speaking engagement because I can't fathom what happened before it happened again. And this is really, when we go into, where this comes from, whether it's your upbringing, if it's social media, if it's we lack self-worth or self-esteem, is it, the psychological traits that we have of just someone who really sets unrealistic standards to themselves over and over, or maybe it's a past experience you had that traumatized you. We need to dive in. You'll see a lot of this is mindset. A lot of this is us unpacking those experiences, unpacking our childhood, unpacking that situation that left a mark on you and saying, okay, can we go back? Can we go and reflect and sit in some of those experiences to learn from them, to use them as an opportunity for us to say, where does the perfectionism that I struggle with and that I experience today really come from? Because 9 times out of 10, the perfectionism that you're experiencing is not necessarily even something to do with the work in front of you. And I think that's where we get stuck. Is we get stuck in this belief that, I just really care about the branding, or I just really care about the photo shoot, or I really care about the offer. When you and I both know that the Canva and the photo shoot or the offer or the marketing or the team member training or whatever you're building and creating, 9 times out of 10 is not about the thing in front of you. Like, think about it like an iceberg. Like, there's what you see and there's what you're experiencing today, which is what you're consciously aware of, which is you fiddling with something over and over and over again and constantly planning to make it perfect. But there's the other 95%, which is what's underneath the surface, which is what your parents taught you about perfectionism, that time that you were rejected or that you failed in something in high school, that, time that you showed up and you weren't showing up curated or put together online and you got negative feedback about it. That's what's really happening. It's not really about the thing in front of you. And so the reason I wanted to unpack where it comes from is I think it's an invitation for us to ask ourselves the tough questions. Have you recently actually dove into those experiences? Have you recently asked yourself the tough questions? Have you taken time and space to actively acknowledge where these things come from? So if you haven't, this is the invitation to start this process. And that actually leads me into how do we overcome it? Because step one, as we always hear, right, is like the first step is awareness. The first step is acknowledgement. But that's why I wanted to cover where does it come from? Because we can't fix it if we don't know where it's sourced from. Where does it come from? So the first step of overcoming and changing your relationship with perfectionism is, first of all, realizing that your ability to overcome perfectionism in itself is not going to be perfect, but also looking at the fact that you have to know where the root of it comes from, because if you don't necessarily know the correlation between what the root of it is, what's causing it, what event is leading to the beliefs you have, and how those beliefs are now changing your behavior. You have to know where the beliefs come from first. So only once you can recognize what the root is and then reframe some of those experiences and the values and the beliefs that you took from them can you actually start to heal your old wounds and use those to move forward in a different way. And so I really want to say, like, understanding the root, I believe you can't move much past this until you understand where it comes from. And I feel like, what I would want to share is that that's a lot easier said than done, right? Like, there's not really this, like, I'm so excited to dive into my trauma. I'm so excited to dive into the event that shaped me today. I'm so excited to dive into XYZ. We're not going to always be excited to do that work. But I will tell you something, as someone who has a big business, who helps other people with big businesses, and all my peers have very big businesses. What you avoid is the thing that is ultimately really where a lot of your opportunity lies. Like, your obstacle is your opportunity. You guys hear me say this all the time on this podcast, and it is a motto that I live by, because the thing that you don't want to acknowledge about your upbringing, the thing that you haven't dove into when it comes to past experiences, are often the reason that you're not able to progress. So all the big business owners that I know, and the way that I've built my business and been able to really see a completely different experience in the way that I operate day to day, came from the fact that I had to hit things head on. I had to seek to understand what the heck was going on with me, and where did these beliefs come from, and where did the root of all these perspectives, how were those shaped? Because only once I understood those could I start to rewire them to choose what I wanted to have as my belief system, instead of just taking the auto programming that I had that came with me when I was a child. So step one is we need to really do some work to acknowledge where it comes from. And how do we do this? This could be through, for example, things like using journal prompts to unpack this for you, kind of like some of those questions that I asked earlier, and dive into those. It could be also working with a mindset coach or working with a therapist to say, hey, like, I have this way that I operate and I don't know where this comes from. So like, I would love to, kind of unpack why I struggle to do XYZ. Really getting an outside perspective, or using your own awarenesses to really just sit back and observe those, and not to make them right, not to make them wrong, just to look at those and analyze them to say, why do I do that? Why do I care about that? Why does the number define me? Why do I need 10 revisions? Right? Like, why do I need to change that one little thing one more time? Why? And like, really starting to ask targeted questions to get some targeted answers. Second, we really need to learn to change the relationship that we have with perfection, and most importantly, with imperfection. And we talked about this in another episode when we were talking about some of the insights of a 7-figure business owner. And one of the things that I will say was an awareness for me. I had to rewire my relationship with what things meant when they were imperfect, because I had to look at the fact that problems, this was a quote that was shared with me, problems are a sign of progress. Think about a car on the road. Only when you experience resistance will you have movement, right? When you have a tire that's literally creating resistance against the road, that's how you know you've got movement. And so for me, I had to change the fact that my problems were not a sign that I was failing. Mistakes were not a sign that I was doing something wrong. They oftentimes were a sign that I was doing something right because I was taking action. I was making and taking steps. I was making moves. And because I was doing that, that's what the sign was to me. Okay, keep going. So I had to learn for myself through very different examples, all different types of examples, to say, what do I believe to be right or wrong about perfect? What is my belief as it pertains to imperfection? What do I believe to be true about imperfection? What do I believe to be true about mistakes? What do I believe to be true about success? What does it mean to me? And I had to ask myself those tough questions, because only by doing so was I able to really realize that I was able to let other people around me make mistakes, but I never gave that permission slip to myself to allow me to also be imperfect. And so there was this aspect of step 2 being giving myself a permission slip and saying, hey, it's okay for it to not be perfect, because imperfect means blank to us. Imperfect to me now is that problems are a sign of progress. That's what it means. And so now when I make a mistake or something doesn't work or we quote unquote fail, I'm like, great, what did we learn? What did we learn? What did we learn? I seek it out now. I want it to happen, because it's when I have those situations happen that I learn the most. And if I learn the most from those, I can take that information and apply that to the next thing to be able to move quicker and get results faster. Step 3 is to set realistic standards. And, again, I have like mottos, or I have analogies that I root into that have helped me a lot with this. And one of the ones is, you wouldn't go to the gym and expect to get abs overnight. So when I'm going into doing something, even for me with this podcast, my first couple episodes in comparison to what we do now are not the best. Okay. Like they're not the best by comparison. But the reality is that it takes time. There's things that take time to see progress in. There are things you have to do and be bad at before you become good at it. And I had to change my relationship with, what was my standard? Was I being realistic? Was I expecting to be like, the Ed Milet show or the Diary of a CEO show on my first episode? How many episodes did they have? And was I comparing my day 30 to someone else's day 300? So something that's immensely helped me as well is, and what I'd recommend to you is to say, what are your standards? What are the standards you hold for yourself? What are the standards that you tell yourself you should, or, again, should is also even in itself a shame-based word, that you ultimately should be achieving? Where do those come from and what are they? And a big thing for me was prioritizing action as the key indicator of success rather than achievement. So my indicator of success is action and the level, the intensity, and the intention of the actions that I'm taking, not the achievement that those actions produce. Okay, I want to just slow that down because this is a really important one. For me, success is by being able to look at and monitor the action that I'm taking, both in intensity and intention, i.e., what's the root of it come from of why I'm taking that action, not in the achievement that those actions provide. I am more focused now on, am I going to the gym each day? And am I getting the reps in? Am I feeling like I'm being consistent with, say, my meal plan? Or am I being consistent with going to the gym? That's what I care about, not micromanaging what the weight says every single day. Because what do we know? We know for a fact that if we focus on the action, the achievement will come. It's when people focus on the achievement that they actually stop acting. So what I now do is, I honestly know what my quote unquote goal or ideal vision might be, but I'm not fixated on that. I'm fixated on the incremental actions I'm taking day in and day out, because I know for a fact with science and with every single aspect of life that the compound effect is true, which is that the things and the actions that you take every single day are what compound over time to help you to achieve. And without this perspective, what ends up happening is you focus so much on the achievement and so much on the destination that you completely ignore the process. And it makes it, frankly, 10 times harder to be able to get through and to be able to persevere through. Another thing that has also really helped me is learning to delegate. I realized that I was doing everything myself because I was choosing to, not because I had to. And this was something that was difficult because it took some time. Like, as I said, it wasn't an overnight thing, but you have to learn to let go. And you have to realize that sometimes we have to learn to let go. And we have to realize that what we are not changing, we are choosing. If you are not changing your relationship and your perspective around delegation and giving to other people, you are choosing automatically to do everything yourself. Everyone is always so happy to be able to make a quick comment here or a quick decision there without recognizing that what you say yes to, you are saying no to something else. If you are saying yes to I'm going to do it, you're saying no to delegation, you're saying, frankly, no to self-care, and you're saying yes to burnout. When you say yes to delegating, you're saying, no, I don't have to all do it myself. No, I'm not the only one who can do this. No, I don't believe that I have to be a one-person show to scale this company. So I realized that if I did not change it, if I did not change my relationship with who could do what and who had the skill sets and who could I trust to give this or this to, if I didn't change my relationship to that, I was not, oh, I have to take on all this work, or I feel like I'm always getting involved, or I have to constantly be in it with all the time with my team. That wasn't the reality. The reality was the fact that I was choosing to be involved. I was choosing to be on those meetings. I was choosing to micromanage the ClickUp. I was choosing to give 8 revisions. That was a choice. And oftentimes people hide in this language, and you may feel like this is tickling for you. You might hide in language that is, oh, but I have to. And I will tell you, 90% of the entrepreneurs that I work with do not have to be involved in things that they're involved in. They're choosing to because they get some kind of payoff by being involved. They don't have to focus on other areas of the business. They get to realize they're micromanaging everything and they feel like they get to keep control over it. There's many reasons why we do it. But realizing that if you choose to not delegate, by choosing not to delegate, you are indirectly choosing that you're going to do everything in your business yourself. Do you actively choose to do everything yourself? Is that a choice that you're choosing to make? And that's only a question that you can answer. But I will tell you that as someone who helps scaling businesses day in, day out, it is the fastest route to burnout and the fastest route to overwhelm. You also have to manage self-criticism, because managing self-criticism as another key pillar to overcoming perfectionism. Managing self-criticism is being able to understand that your negative self-talk is what is fueling your perfectionism. So only once we actually get a handle on the self-talk and the internal dialogues that are happening are we going to get a handle on the perfectionism. So one of the ways that we have to be able to do this, or that we need to address, is to be able to say, okay, well, mistakes don't mean I'm less valuable. Me not having a launch that crushes doesn't mean anything about me as a business owner. Me, having someone not engage with a post I put on social media doesn't mean that it was a bad post. It just means that they didn't resonate with it. Right? It's not internalizing. We cannot internalize the things that happen in our business. And this is something I talk to business owners a lot about, because I say that, when especially you're a personal brand, you're literally the face of your business. So when somebody, denies your business or does something that basically is them saying that they don't enjoy something that you've done, created, launched, posted, whatever it might be, when that happens, you, because you're a personal brand, internalize that feedback of it not doing well as they don't not like the offer, they don't like you. That's what the internalization of that is. And so what ends up happening is we start to self-criticize when things don't go wrong in the business. I'm doing wrong. When the business is not quote unquote successful for whatever the metric may be, I'm not successful. And so there's also this really important element of distinguishing the self-dialogues that are happening around both success and what success means, i.e. when things are crushing, what does that mean about you? And remembering that you can't acknowledge all the highs and then feel differently or navigate the dialogue differently with the lows. And so it really does come down to having this distinction between the two so you can manage the self dialogue to realize your business and whatever happens in it, both positive or negative, is not a reflection of your worth. You are not more worthy as an individual or business owner because you make more money. You are not less worthy because you make less money than the person next to you. This is why when I have events or I have retreats, anything, one of our ground rules is we don't talk about income. We are not talking about how much you're making. And if you do, you break the rules. And every single dinner that we have or any event that we have, we set this as ground rule, because what I know is that there is a constant pattern that people believe that they are not worthy unless their business looks a certain way. Or that even when people's businesses are doing really well, I've hosted rooms where people are doing 2 million a year, but the girl beside me, she's hosting, 3 million a year. She's managing 3 million and I'm doing 2 million. Now I'm insecure because I'm making less than the person next to me. So we have to be able to recognize that our success is not directly correlated to our business. We are worthy regardless of what our business does, high or low. And we also have to look at what is the cost of perfectionism, right? The cost of perfectionism is that we don't have progress. We can't see the milestones. We can't see the wins. We can't create momentum. And the cost of perfectionism, frankly, is your mental well-being. Your experience, because of your perfectionist tendency at this moment, is totally different than it could be for you just because of your perspective. Like, imagine how you feel in your business day in and day out, feeling entirely different because your perspective around your business is different. Your experience of your business could be totally different just if you change your perspective. And I know that sounds like, oh, that's easier said than done. No, it's not, because it's actually just a choice. It's a choice to say that instead of it being perfect to hit X milestone, you say, you know what? I learned a lot. I made great progress. The next goal I want to go for is blank. Boom, done. It's choosing the language. It's choosing the perspective. It's choosing what you value and what you acknowledge along the way. And so we have to recognize that while perfect means in many people's minds that it's 100% done, that it's everything that it could have been, that I achieved the ideal vision, like it's dialed in to the perfect way that it could be. Yes, but it's also costing you progress. It's costing you mental well-being. It's costing you your self-worth. It's costing you action. It's costing you time. It's costing you success more than it's bringing you success by making it perfect. And I will also say that you need to change the relationship with feedback. This was something that changed everything for me. I literally seek people out telling me things that they have as feedback. What did you like? What do you not like? I ask my clients, you guys, love you to pieces if you're listening to this. I ask them on Q&As and I ask them on calls to say, hey, is there any resources we could make that would be best for you? Is there any way that we could host these calls that would make these more impactful for you? Is there anything you did or didn't like about the retreat? Is there anything that, you would find that would be supportive for you in the way that we host XYZ? I am constantly asking people, because what I know is that perfection, back to our earlier point we started off today's episode with, perfection is similar to beauty. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? What you deem to be beautiful is different than the person next to you. What you believe to be perfect is different than the belief of your team, which is different than the belief of your clients, which is different than the belief of your social audience. So by opening up to feedback, what we're doing is we're getting an actual accurate representation of what do people enjoy and what can I give them more of. And hey, here's the thing too. When someone gives you negative feedback, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to do anything about it. It's just awareness. We get to sort and say, what lands true for me? What do I feel to be true about that? Do I take that? Do I internalize that? And so feedback and putting in the reps of feedback will change your relationship with quote unquote criticism or your relationship with quote unquote failure. Because by asking for feedback, you're normalizing the relationship with having things not always being said the way you want to have them said, having things not always look the way you want to have them look, or having things experienced in a way that's not always the way you intended them to be experienced. It's a tool and a muscle that will massively impact you within your business. And I will say, as the last piece, creating a network of people who are like-minded. You need to be surrounded by other people who also in themselves do not believe or perceive perfection to be the way that they are able to grow their business or the reason that they're going to be successful. And I'm so grateful for the people that are in my surroundings because they're part of the thing that keeps me grounded to knowing that my Instagram doesn't need to look a specific way. My body and my, face or my look does not need to look a certain way. My business does not need to hit a certain number for me to be valuable. I don't need to have things look or be a specific way for me to be okay. So when I get in patterns, like I said earlier today with that reel, and my peer called me out and said, "Hey, Kate, you've gone like 6 revisions. It's time to throw it in and put it up and call it a day." How this reel does will not determine how your retreat does. Let it go. I needed someone in my corner to basically hit me over the head with a little dose of reality, because without that, I would have stayed in my cycle. You need a network of people who also don't believe that perfect is what ultimately allows you to be valuable or allows your business to be valuable. And on the other side of the same piece, we also need to be very aware of those that we do have around us who reinforce perfect as the destination. If you are somebody who's thinking about your circle, think about the top 5, think about the top 10 people that you're around right now. Do they, whether intentionally or not, promote perfectionism? Do they, whether intentionally or not, promote, doing things the right way, the perfect way, the ideal way? There's always work to be done. If that is a perspective that you have in your surroundings day in and day out, you're going to internalize that. So it's not to say that you can't be around these people, but you might want to distance yourself until you build up that internal barrier to have a filtering mechanism to say, yes, that's what you believe, but that's not true for me. And simultaneously, allowing yourself to be supported by other people who do value and balance values around a perspective that perfectionism is not needed in any bucket, in appearance, in relationships, in health, in business, in numbers, it doesn't matter. So today we went into, perfectionism and what is it and signs that you might be struggling with it and realizing you're not alone with the stats we cover, understanding where it comes from, and most importantly, how to overcome it and how to move forward. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is, as I said, this is something that I've struggled with for years as a business owner. I will say I was much, much worse at the beginning in the first, call it 3 years of business. I didn't want a single thing happening or moving or existing without me touching it. But what I will say now is that this has been a reps thing. It's not something you just decide, as of tomorrow, I'm not going to be a perfectionist. It's really going and diving into some of the things we talked about today and unpacking those beliefs and getting practices and putting in the reps, looking at your circle, all of those different tactical, strategic things to say, okay, if I was going to give you a piece of homework, I would say, what is 1 or 2 of the things that you heard today that you can promise yourself you're going to execute in the next 2 to 3 business days? Also, what you hear me say all the time is success loves speed. It's the idea or the aha moment between something and then moving from there into action as fast as possible that will allow you to see actual change from listening to these episodes. So if something landed for you today, if you feel like you are someone who's struggling with perfectionism, maybe you have a circle of perfectionists that you're around, if you are wanting to make a change in this, let this be the sign you needed. Let this be the spark that allowed you to say, I'm not doing this anymore. I want to experience business differently. I want to experience my life differently. And I realize that it starts with my perspective. It starts with my mindset. And so you can start to take some of the tips from today and integrate those to see movement very fast. You will feel a weight off your shoulders. And I will share a story to kind of end today. I actually had this most recently in my appearance, if I'm just going to be really transparent with you. Since I was young, have always, I want to say since I was in grade 6, I've loved makeup. Loved makeup. And I still love makeup. definitely to this day. It's always been something that I kind of found like therapeutic. It's almost like an art for me. But what I realized was I met somebody, and when we started to kind of, spend time and be around each other in the same circle, it was interesting because I, with some friends, was comfortable to like not have my makeup and, basically like I always joke, like take my quote unquote face off, and like put my pimple patches on. Like we would just hang out and spend time together. But it was interesting because I wasn't comfortable around someone I didn't know doing that. And what I realized was that, again, going back to perfectionism, like I cared about what they thought about me. And I was someone who tied my self-worth to my appearance. And I had all of these insecurities that were coming up of like, well, they know my business, they know how, successful I am. And so because of that, what if they see me now, looking disheveled and they think differently of me, or like the belief around me isn't the same. And all these thoughts came in. And I had someone say to me, they said, listen, you are valuable to me. And this was unprompted. This was just like smacked me over the head with a 2x4, basically, of truth. They said, you're valuable to me. And I want to be around you, get to know you, spend time with you as you. And I don't care about anything else. And, pimple patches, welcome. If you want to wear sweatpants and it's got a stain on it, welcome. Like all of it is welcomed. Like I want to be around all of it. Like I'm here for all of it. And it was like this one simple conversation, but that I needed, because I realized until that moment, I actually was really trying to, not consciously, but subconsciously, I was feeling this pressure to almost like perform in a way and to be on. And that I was only not on around like 5, 6 people that I was super, super close with, because everybody else I wasn't super comfortable to be that way with. That was like 10 months ago, that interaction when this person came into my life. And so it changed me, because since then I was like, hey, like, here's me with my pimple patches. I like often we interface with me looking at a certain way, or, I started to dress more casually and feel very comfortable in it, whereas before I wasn't. And I realized that it wasn't really me wanting to be perfect, was because I lacked the self-esteem to just be who I was and that be enough. And I say this because today may resonate on a business level. It may resonate on a personal level. It can resonate in so many different buckets, but this is something that I'm still working through. For me, I feel like the business bucket, I've made massive progress with, but now I'm working on this in my individual self, like even in my body, to say, okay, well, like I'm okay regardless of what size I am. I'm okay regardless of whether I shave my legs today or not. Like I'm, like those pieces for me were something that I struggled to ever not look a certain way or be quote unquote put together, because back to what we said earlier, that was my upbringing. That's what I was taught was the right way to be. You're always basically presentable. You're always in a place where you should be put together. But I took that and internalized that and made it become an extreme that actually ended up for me becoming something stressful, because when I would go to interface with new people, I'd always want to quote unquote get ready. And yet I had this friend, bless her heart, I'm just obsessed with her personality. She does not care who she meets. She does not care who she sees or interfaces with. She's like, this is me. Here you go. Take it or leave it. She doesn't care how much money you make. She doesn't care, what your status is. She doesn't care about any of those things. She's like, this is me. Take it or leave it. I love who I am. And it's one of the parts of her that I admire the most. And it's something that I realized was because she didn't care about perfect. She didn't care about the perception of others. She had rewritten her experience with, rejection. She had rewritten her experience of other people's beliefs or values or what they believe to be true about her. And that can be learned in a personal bucket, but it can also be learned in the business bucket. So I just want to share that because it's something that, as I said, I'm not preaching this from at all this aspect of, I'm amazing and here's what you need to do. I'm right in this with you, girl. But I want to share this because these are some of the things that have really helped me in my business. And now I'm taking those same insights and moving those to my personal life. So listen, I would love to just hear anything that kind of landed for you. Maybe you found that, in listening to today's episode, maybe you had an awareness about your upbringing that you kind of never really thought about until today. Maybe you recognize there was an experience when you were a kid that really impacted you. And because of that, you kind of have some fear around it and some leftover feelings that are kind of ruminating around it. Whatever it might be, I would love to just hear what your download was today. So, as you guys know, I always love to hear from you. Anything that kind of registers for you from these shows and from these episodes, just send me a message on Instagram and be like, hey, I listened to the Perfectionist episode and this is what came through for me. I just always love chatting with you and being able to see what lands and what comes through and hearing your breakthroughs of just, the content and what we talk about today. And also maybe you want to share what you're going to do about it. What are some of the things that you took as takeaways that you're really excited to put into action? And you hear me talk about this a lot in other episodes. One of the fastest ways to experience a transformation is to be witnessed in it, which is why I ask you to reach out to me every week. Because when you have someone else that you've verbally acknowledged something to, and you are witnessed in your transformation, you will actually move in that transformation quicker and easier because you've been witnessed in it. You can't hide from the shift that has happened inside of you because someone else has been exposed to it. So this is an invitation. Fill my DMs, shoot up the messages in my DMs. I would absolutely love to connect with you. As always, I appreciate you so much and thank you so much for listening each week. And if you're new here, I am so excited to have you as part of the Ambitious family, and I cannot wait to see you next week. And as always, you guys, I'll see you on next week's episode. So until then, stay ambitious.